Big news for the Buckeyes today as they land four-star defensive tackle Kayden McDonald out of North Gwinnett High School in suburban Atlanta. We're going to get to that here in a minute. But first, I want to introduce everyone to the new Skull Session recruiting podcast brought to you by BuckeyeHuddle.com. I am Marc Givler. If you've been following me for, the past 12, 15 years, whatever it's been now, I've written a Skull Session recruiting feature every week on the various sites I've worked at. That's continued here at BuckeyeHuddle.com. And we are now branding my recruiting podcast in the same vein. So this will be a audio-video version of the Skull Session columns. We'll have maybe some different topics, and it's not going to be the exact same as the column. Obviously, our readers are always going to get a little extra there on the Buckeye Huddle premium board. But we're going to kind of take this theme of giving inside recruiting information to the podcast waves. I am joined here by Kevin Noon. This will be kind of a revolving door of co-hosts with me. Kevin's going to be on quite a bit. Alex will be on once he gets back from paternity leave, we'll call it. And we'll have some interesting guests as well as we move along here and build the podcast up. But Kevin, big news. Buckeyes, again, land four-star defensive tackle Kayden McDonald. They beat out Clemson. They beat out Florida. They beat out Oklahoma. You said you watched some of the tape here as we were putting this together. What do you see in McDonald and kind of how big is this for the Buckeyes?
Yeah, I think this is a big deal because you look at Ohio State and generally where it goes with its interior defensive linemen. I mean, they go a lot more three techs than they do ones. I mean, could Kaden be a zero? I mean, I'm not sure about that. I mean, how that would fit within the Jim Knowles, Larry Johnson scheme. But, you see a guy who comes out of a talent-rich school, out of a talent-rich area, and he's able to perform. I mean, he's not somebody who's doing this against, little Timmy or whatever. He's out there playing against some dudes. So, I mean, this is a huge pickup. I mean, this was one that for a long time just felt like it was Clemson. Tides change sometimes. And I think it's a huge get, especially with Ohio State still very much in the hunt for multiple defensive ends. But to get somebody like this inside and just seeing how impactful the interior defensive line has been for Ohio State with guys like Mike Hall Jr., with guys like Tyleik Williams, I think this is just a huge get.
Yeah, and we'll get to some of the backstory here in a minute. But the defensive tackle position has kind of went a bit underappreciated in this recruiting class. Everyone, and we're going to talk about the defensive ends briefly here at the end, but everyone is so focused on the defensive ends right now that I think people are missing the idea that they actually need the immediate bodies at defensive tackle a little bit more, even than defensive end. They're going to get some guys back at defensive end next year, Tuamaloau, Sawyer, et cetera. And but they're gonna lose quite a bit there in terms of the versatility up front with guys like Teron Vincent, with even a Zach Harrison who can play inside on pass rushing down. So that and some of the attrition they've had over the years and just kind of the general roster setup, I would argue they need defensive tackles just as much as defensive ends. So I think people have kind of underappreciated that here as they move along in this class. You hit on it. Kaden is a different guy than Jason Moore is. And I think he's different than Will Smith Jr. as well. I think those guys are probably three techs. Jason Moore certainly is. Will Smith possibly could bulk up and play one, but you look at a bigger bodied guy there in the middle. That's Kayden McDonald. He complements very well kind of what they have already. They've got some, again, Jason Moore is a freakish kind of interior pass rushing prospect. And so this is more of a 300 plus pounder. Gonna, hopefully stuff the run for him a little bit and take up some space. So really nice pickup. Kaden's, a guy who, again, it's hard to teach. You can teach, Larry Johnson can teach all the technique in the world, but 6'4", 310, 315, whatever he is right now, you can't teach that. So he's bringing a lot of physical presence there. And again, compliments the guys they have really well. I want to kind of talk about a little bit here what happened. I think we're still, and I think we're still going to be piecing this together here, maybe all the way until through signing day, as maybe Kaden will open up a little more about how this all came to pass. But as you mentioned, Clemson was the prohibitive favorite for a long time. I mean, at least going back at least 6 months. Ohio State was in there early, got an early visit out of him. Things were going well. Got a little quiet for a while. I think that's just Caden's nature, is to be quiet. I don't think it was anything, weird. I don't think that he never dropped Ohio State. Ohio State certainly never dropped him. Larry Johnson was incredibly persistent here. But for whatever reason, just one of those kids that kind of went radio silent for a while there. And I think people just assumed, it was going to be all Clemson. He had, tentatively set an official visit for Thanksgiving weekend to Clemson, which if he's going to make an October 31st announcement, obviously that was kind of a dead giveaway. He moved up the visit, and Tom Moore and I had talked about this, I think, on the Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning podcast. And, where I kind of said, hey, if Ohio State wants to land Kayden McDonald, they're going to have to get him to move that Clemson visit. He can't visit, he can't decide on October 31st and visit Clemson Thanksgiving weekend. That's a dead giveaway what he's thinking. So he did move it up. He moved the Clemson visit up to the weekend before his announcement, or I guess 2 weekends before his announcement, technically. Late last week, maybe, again, let's call it 10 to 14 days out from his announcement. I have a source reach out to me from a different part of the country and say, what's Ohio State's sense on Kayden McDonald? What's your sense on Kayden McDonald? And I just told him, I said, look, Ohio State's felt they did a great job on the visit. They felt they got his attention. I still think it's going to be Clemson. I haven't had any reason to tell me it's not going to be Clemson. And this person said, well, I was just told by somebody that Clemson's not even in the top 3 right now. And I said, oh, okay, well, that's weird. Let me check around on that. So I kind of threw that out there to some other people. And I had another person who I was kind of leaning on a lot during this time to kind of guide me through the McDonald process. And he said, not only is Clemson not top 3, they're out. And that was like okay. And these are different sources, totally different circles. They're definitely not the sources I'm talking to are not talking to each other. There's no chance of that. So it was really strange. And slowly but surely, I just kept talking to more and more people, and I kept hearing the same thing. And it became a thing of, okay, one of two things is happening here. He's going to Ohio State, or he is throwing out just a world-class epic smokescreen. And Kaden has been so quiet during his process that he never struck me as the smokescreen type. So just, too much good information there down the stretch last 2 weeks from good sources and people I've trusted for a long time, especially when it comes to Kaden or other situations like Kaden's. So it just, it was all lining up. And then, of course, again, we doubled down on it earlier today. Alex did as well. Just everything was lining up. Kevin, we've seen some weird recruitments, some ones that have, kind of turned maybe sometimes the wrong way for Ohio State. I guess as you followed this a little bit, where does this stack up? Is this, on a, let's call it a 1 to 10 scale, with 10 being like, oh my God, I'm stunned. How would you rank this one in terms of where maybe you thought this was headed 2 or 3 weeks ago?
Yeah, I mean, if Kaden were more of a communicator, if he were talking more, I think I'd be more shocked. But the fact that he hasn't said anything, I guess, since it flew so far under the radar, and then it was going from, well, he's just going to Clemson to, I really think he might be going to Ohio State. I mean, I would still probably only put this as a 3. I mean, we've certainly seen those left field recruitments before that, you just wake up and all of a sudden it's all changed, and the kid's out there self-promoting, and there's a third uncle out there self-promoting, and so on and so forth. But this one is, it's a pleasant shock. I'm just shocked that they're going after a kid that's a 1 tech, because we just don't see a lot of them. How many Ohio State commits can we count on one hand that have been a 1 tech since, I don't know, Jonathan Hankins? I mean, there's just not a lot of them that have been out there. So, if there had been a lot of noise, then maybe, I'd feel this. But I agree with you 1,000% when you talk about the smokescreen and the huge bluff. You always had to kind of hold out a little bit. But he just had, we know the kids that are the game players. We like the game players. They're fun. They're fun to cover. There's a lot to it. It really generates a lot of conversation out there. Kayden McDonald could have honestly just stayed silent all the way up until signing day. And I don't know if the vast majority of the Ohio State fan base would have been aware. So I was shocked that he announced on television.
Yeah, and as you say with the game, he's kind of the anti-Kristen Miller, who we both really like personally, but we knew, when the buzz started picking up last winter of, oh, maybe it's not Georgia, and it's like, let's. I think he gave it away. I think the cat was out of the bag a few months early. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube type of thing, and so we kind of sniffed out the smoke screen on that one. This one had a different vibe. Kaden's pretty quiet. Not a big attention person. So you buy the information more, but yeah, there was some eye-opening stuff coming from people I trusted on this. And it's one of those things where, like I said, we've seen some go the other way for Ohio State where, we thought they were getting a kid and something happens late and it goes awry, but big one here. Look, they're still working hard in the Atlanta area. They have not given up on Caleb Downs. But every year you can get a couple of these types of guys out of the area is good. They've got Kane Lee. They're trying to continue this. They're in on a lot of the Buford kids next year. So I think that's an important footnote here too, is, got to keep that Atlanta.
Huge, yes. But yeah. Miguel Patrick, bringing him in has just been a huge addition for their efforts in Atlanta.
Yeah. He's definitely, he's not one of the 10, coaches or whatever, but he's had as much of a recruiting impact, I think, as almost anyone south of maybe Brian Hartline or Larry Johnson as far as the support staff. So another credit to him for what he's helped Ohio State do in the Atlanta area. So obviously now the focus is going to turn to defensive ends, which it already has. It's funny. I mean, I almost feel bad for Kaden. Everyone is so, locked in on these 3 5-star defensive ends they're chasing. But this makes life a lot easier, I think, now for Larry Johnson and the defensive staff is they've got their defensive tackles figured out. That's done. So it's one less thing to worry about here down the stretch. Now they turn their attention to defensive ends. I'll just, quickly update things here. It's not even much of an update as it is a kind of reiteration of kind of what we've been saying. But right now I've got Damon Wilson, most likely going to Ohio State. I've got Keon Keeley, most likely going to Alabama. I've got Mateo Uyangale. I think still Ohio State. I know USC is pushing very hard. They're having a good season. You're getting that new coach bump. Lincoln Riley's doing a good job there. And they're going to be able to sell the early playing time, certainly, of course, in addition to the geography, just because, the defense right now is not up to, what I think the standards are going to need to be out there for them to compete with the Alabamas, Georgias, Ohio States, Clemsons of the world. But, there's some things going for them right now. I still have Ohio State there. So I kind of got 2 out of 3 right now. I think Ohio State would be thrilled with that. I think you guys should be thrilled with that if it happens. Kevin, anything to add there on defensive ends or kind of what you think, I guess, moving forward there as they try and finish this out?
I think they just need to pop in the game tape from Penn State and show what JT Tuimoloau was able to do, especially with somebody like Mateo, and say, look, we went all the way to the state of Washington and pulled JT out of there. I mean, they even said on the telecast that, being able to learn under Larry Johnson was pivotal in his decision. And you know what you're going to get there. And, and the truth of the matter is that first year JT Tuimoloau, who committed on July 4th, didn't have spring, didn't really have summer, came into fall. He got more playing time than Jack Sawyer did just because of where his body type was and what the needs were. So, I think Ohio State has a good counter to anything that USC could tell Mateo or what anybody else is going to say there. I mean, the likelihood of getting all 3 is pretty slim, but I think that 2 is very much that sweet spot of where they could land.
Yeah. And look, they have the relationships edge with Mateo. They go back years with the family. They got in on him early. They've had him out on multiple visits. They had him out on campus before Lincoln Riley, I think, even had the job. So they're in good shape in that battle as far as the relationships, and I think that'll continue to serve them well here the next 2 months. I do think that one's going to go the distance. I think probably signing day December is going to be the earliest. I mean, it would not shock me if it went further than that. And then you've got Damon Wilson, who's kind of an any day now. Keon Keeley, Damon Wilson and Keon Keeley are pretty much whatever day they wake up and feel like they're ready to make a decision is when we're going to hear from them. That there's, I still expect it's before Thanksgiving, but who knows? The longer this goes, obviously, if it was an easy decision for either one of them, I think they'd be committed already. So we'll see. We'll see if they can come to a decision. But I like where they're at with Damon Wilson specifically right now. I think the pitch there has been pretty simple beyond just Larry Johnson and his pedigree and just the relationships. I think it's been, look, we're doing this. We're standing up our defensive ends now. We're looking for speed rushers off the edge. Bit of a different scheme defensively now up front. We don't have guys like you. And I think we don't have body types like you. Damon Wilson does not play the same type of game that JT Tuimoloau plays. They're very different. They're both defensive ends, but they play the position very differently. They bring different skills, unique talents to the table. And so I think that's helping them very much so with Wilson right now. But, we'll see how it goes here the next few weeks. Kevin, thank you for co-hosting and producing and everything else you're doing with the podcast. And appreciate our discussion here. We will have more on this podcast soon. This is the first episode, so we had to start it off with a commitment episode. How could we start a recruiting podcast any other way? So we'll have more insight, analysis. I'm going to try and do this at least once a week moving forward. So any topics you guys want to hear about, drop it in the comments on YouTube or get at me on the message board or on Twitter. And we'll try and get as much discussion here that you guys want to hear as possible and get you some interesting guests here in the future as well. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.